Well, Keir Starmer's Labour Party already in massive, massive trouble. No answers really, it seems, when it comes to actually sorting out the problems in this country. We now learn terror suspects among those crossing on small boats, and another 10,000 people having crossed since Labour came in. They seem to have absolutely no real plan to stop any of this. And we already see in the polls a consistent trend. The latest poll that's come out, actually a Techni poll, showing Labour and the Tories actually down. And as we've seen in poll after poll, it's Reform that are the big gainers, this time up 3, as the Conservatives go down 3 and Labour go down 2.
The unthinkable is happening here. Starmer's leadership is unravelling before our very eyes, as his own ministers are resigning in protest over secret deals being exposed, and now his entire team is turning against him.
Why are you targeting the elderly to save money?
We have found a £22 billion black hole in the economy, and we've got to fix it. What we're not going to do is pretend it isn't there or paper over it. That's what the last government did, and it made it worse. That means we've got to make tough choices. I don't want to cut the winter fuel allowance. I don't think anybody government wants to do that, but we've got to fix the foundations of our economy. And that's what this is all about, making sure that we fix the foundations, and then having done that, that we can build the better future that pensioners and so many other people voted for in this election. So this is a tough decision. Not a decision I want to make, but I'm absolutely determined we'll stabilise the economy and fix the foundations. And then on that, we will build the better Britain that we were elected into government with a strong mind.
Reports have emerged that Labour is promising to go into more regulation, higher public spending and higher taxation. The result is higher unemployment, less growth and a financial crisis. However, that is not the reason for the recent crisis facing Keir Starmer's leadership. The reason for this political torpedo threatening Starmer's premiership is external.
Your circumstances, but I doubt when you hear the energy companies and the government talking about £3,500 possibly for energy bills going up to £4,000. I suspect, like many, many other people, you shudder at that because these are huge, huge amounts of money, which is why we say under a Labour government we'd freeze those prices. We wouldn't allow them to go up, Ella, because what you're already paying is going to go through the roof. And I don't know how you would cope with that, Ella.
Full time, term time, because I've got a young child.
Yeah.
So I don't get paid that much.
Thank you, Ella. And it is just a reminder. I mean, I know politicians meet their constituents; they know this, but this whole country's hurting at the moment.
Oh,
and whether this might be too big for you or any party to sort out.
Yeah. Look, I mean,
in national government,
in terms of how it's impacting on people, obviously part of my job is to be around the country the whole time to talk to people and.
What began as a murmur of discontent inside the Labour Party has exploded into full-scale mutiny. But what's really behind this political earthquake? The shocking truth about Starmer's brutal aid cuts and his betrayal of Ukraine has ignited a devastating rebellion within the Labour Party.
You see Muslims making a difference, helping to deliver every single one of the government's missions. In business, helping to grow our economy. In education, giving our young people the opportunities that they deserve. In our NHS, of course. In charity work. British Muslims are amongst the most generous group in the United Kingdom and beyond. So I must say thank you to you for all of that. And particularly what I know has been a very difficult time for Muslims here in the United Kingdom. With the pain of the conflict in Gaza and the suffering of the Palestinians. I've been profoundly moved.
This crisis could spell the end of his leadership. Could this be the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer and his government? Will he be forced to resign as his party crumbles around him? This is the story of how Labour's leadership crisis spiralled out of control and why Starmer's downfall might now be inevitable. In the last few months, whispers of discontent have been growing within Labour as backbenchers were grumbling, MPS were uneasy, and behind closed doors, a storm was brewing. However, Labour had appeared strong in the polls, and for the first time in years it looked like the party had a real shot at winning the next general election. Nevertheless, beneath the surface, deep cracks were beginning to show. Starmer's leadership style had alienated many within his own party, as his tight grip on decision-making, reluctance to consult senior Labour figures, and his increasingly authoritarian approach had left many MPs feeling marginalised and frustrated within the party. For some time, these tensions remained hidden from the public. But then came the bombshell. It all started with a secret deal, one Starmer never wanted the public or even his own party to know about. A leaked document revealed a shocking truth. Despite publicly standing firm in his support for Ukraine, Starmer had been quietly scaling back Britain's aid commitments. In the last few months, his government had been cutting key financial and military assistance meant for Ukraine, weakening Britain's role in the global response to the war. But behind closed doors, Starmer's team was working to systematically reduce Britain's support, while at the same time telling the public the complete opposite. In speeches and interviews, Starmer confidently declared Labour's unwavering support for Ukraine, but privately, internal email showed his government was discussing how to cut costs, quietly reduce aid, and avoid public backlash when this secret was exposed.
So here we are, it's Euston Station, just about 7 o'clock in the morning, about to get a train to meet the rest of the Shadow Cabinet and Jeremy Corbyn in Birmingham to launch our manifesto. I think in this election, what I'm hearing is people really want change. They want to end the inequality that they see. They just want decency and dignity.
It was the final straw for many in his party. The backlash was immediate and explosive as one after another Labour's top ministers began to resign. Among them was one of Starmer's closest allies. A senior minister who had stood by his side through thick and thin, but even she could no longer defend him. The public condemnation was brutal, as many saw this action as a total betrayal of British values. And they weren't alone, more resignations followed. Behind the scenes, Labour MPs are panicking, some fearing this scandal could cost them the next election.
There's a disastrous, frankly dystopian Keir Starmer government full of a bunch of, his cabinet are a bunch of over-promoted student politicians who have no business running anything, let alone a great country like this. But look, whether it's 0.1% growth...
Others saw this as an opportunity, a chance to finally bring down Starmer and replace him before it was too late. Emergency meetings were held late into the night, as Labour's top officials were scrambling to limit the damage, trying desperately to stop more ministers from walking out.
The first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO, and of course to reiterate, as I did to President Zelensky yesterday, the support that we will have in this country and with our allies towards Ukraine.
But the damage was already done as Starmer's leadership began to collapse. Labour itself was descending into chaos as some MPs were furious at the betrayal, while others were terrified not just of losing power, but of what this scandal revealed about their leader. For several months, Labour's inner circle had been plotting behind the scenes, trying to control the narrative, trying to manipulate public perception. Now, the truth was out in the open, and the worst part of the leak that triggered this crisis didn't come from an outsider, it came from someone inside Labour. Someone who had access to confidential documents. Someone who had finally had enough of Starmer's double dealing.
Well, it has been a rough start to the week for the government, with a new poll, Ipsos poll, actually revealing a substantial drop in favourability for Labour following their landslide election victory in July.
Yes, 52% polled said that they think Britain is now moving in the wrong direction under Labour. Only 22% were in favour of the government's approach.
Oh, so Keir Starmer remains the most popular politician with a 38% favourability rating.
Angela Rayner at a close second with 33%.
And Rachel Reeves in third at 27%.
Well, all of this comes as the Conservative Party leadership hopefuls have put aside their differences and united against Rachel Reeves's winter fuel payment decision.
Well, joining us now in the studio is political correspondent for The Spectator, James Heal. Right, so let's talk about the backlash of this winter fuel idea, because we also noticed that potentially it will end up costing them more.
This particular individual knew that Starmer's team had been deliberately misleading the public. He knew that behind closed doors, Labour's leadership was having secret discussions about how to scale back aid while pretending to support Ukraine. And so he made the ultimate decision to leak the evidence. The public reaction was immediate and unforgiving. Social media erupted with outrage, and opposition parties seized the opportunity, attacking Labour with everything they could come up with. For instance, Conservative MPS called it the biggest Labour betrayal in modern history. Even Labour's own members are struggling to defend Starmer. The outcome is that the momentum Labour had spent years building was crumbling overnight. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, a new revelation emerged. Now, reports have surfaced that Starmer's team had actively tried to silence MPS, who had raised concerns about the aid cuts. Insiders claimed that ministers were pressured to stay silent and that any public criticism would be seen as damaging to Labour's election prospects. This kind of internal manipulation and control was exactly what many had feared. Labour's leadership was not just misleading the public, they were also misleading their own MPS, and now Starmer is facing the biggest crisis of his career. The pressure on Starmer is unbearable as his closest allies are deserting him. Labour MITs are secretly plotting his removal, and yet he refuses to step down. Behind the scenes, his team is desperately trying to shift the blame, but the evidence against him is too overwhelming, and more resignations are expected. Nonetheless, more damning leaks could be on the horizon, and if this crisis continues, Starmer's leadership could be over within weeks. Despite the chaos unfolding around him, Starmer is refusing to step down. Instead of acknowledging the mounting scandals, he's doubling down, insisting that his leadership remains strong, that Labour is still united, and that these resignations are nothing more than internal disagreements. But behind the scenes, the reality could be more different, as Starmer's inner circle is in full panic mode. Advisors are frantically working to control the narrative, crafting carefully worded statements to downplay the crisis, with crisis meetings being held daily with Starmer's top strategists, where they are brainstorming ways to turn the tide. However, the more they try to spin the story, the more it backfires. Reports have surfaced that Starmer's team is considering drastic measures to contain the fallout. Some insiders claim Labour is preparing a mass reshuffle, a desperate attempt to replace the ministers who resigned and project an image of stability, others suggest. Starmer may try to shift the blame entirely by pinning the scandal on miscommunication by his team rather than admitting any wrongdoing himself. Overall, if he refuses to step aside, the pressure will only continue to mount, and more resignations could follow. In addition, more damaging leaks could surface, and if the rebellion within Labour gains enough traction, Starmer could face a leadership challenge within weeks.
Mr. Speaker, for years, the Prime Minister and his cabinet played politics with the WASPy women. The Deputy Prime Minister said Conservatives were stealing their pensions. She promised to compensate them in full. Another broken promise. Now they admit we were right all along. But let's ask about another group of pensioners whose trust... Let's ask about another group of pensioners whose trust was broken. Since the Chancellor cut winter fuel payments, how many extra people have applied for pension credit?
Mr. Speaker, the number one job of this government was to put the finances back in order after...
But even if he survives this immediate crisis, the damage to his reputation may be permanent. If you enjoyed this political firestorm, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating political content.